In every market economy, the financial system is the brains of the shop. So there is a phrase we use which is that Wall Street tells Main Street what to do. How resources get invested, what industries get investment, what management teams get money, this is determined by the financial system. So love it or hate it, we have to confront the problem of building a well-functioning financial system. It can well be that there are problems in how finance works and that financial firms make supernormal profits. Okay? There is merit in the criticism of Wall Street prior to the crisis that government guarantees and government protection enabled them to make supernormal profits. So they're two distinct issues. But the first point is that finance is just this absolutely basic plumbing that runs inside capitalism and that makes everything happen. So finance is the brain of the economy. That's why you need a financial system. One way to write rules in finance is to write very detailed prescriptive rules where every little thing is defined by the government. So for example, a government can say that when you have a mutual fund advertisement, the advertisement should contain a disclosure about the risks of the mutual fund in 12-point font. Okay, that's the level of detail to which it goes. For example, the government used to have a requirement that some X% of the time in a TV ad had to be spent on the risk disclosure. So you get this crazy garbled sound in a television advertisement where all the spaces between words are removed in order to comply with the rules. And that tells you immediately what is a problem with rules-based regulation. Once you write down these rules, financial firms then treat them as the target. That, okay, how do I make the most money by doing the most venal things while complying with these rules? So rules-based regulation is really not a very wise way to conduct ourselves. Another problem is that very often the rules interfere with innovation. So you want to come up with a new product or a new idea on how to do something and the present rules don't allow it. So both ways are a problem. The rules-based approach is not good for growth and progress. The rules-based approach is actually conducive to financial firms that will cheat on the rules. The principles-based approach tries to step away and say, here's the principle. The principle is that you have to do a reasonable and fair amount of disclosure to households about the risks of the mutual fund scheme. And that is a vaguely worded phrase. But then you hold financial firms accountable for living by the principle rather than by the letter of the law. So that's the whole idea of principles-based regulation. And hypothetically, there will be new technology tomorrow. You will have an ad on Twitter. And then in those 140 bytes, you will have to say something about what is reasonable disclosure. And so the world will keep on changing, technology will keep on changing. In a principles-based framework, technology will not be coded into the rules. The principle will be at a conceptual level. Remember, step one, regulation. Financial regulators write law. They are unelected bureaucrats who write law, who have the discretion to write law, who are empowered by parliament to write law. There is no way to make that non-discretionary. So we must give discretion to financial regulators. And then the same thing happens in the supervisory question, which is where I was saying that a principles-based approach gives greater discretion to these regulatory agencies. There is no running away then from confronting the question of what is this regulatory agency? How is the regulatory agency constructed? How do you create checks and balances so that the regulatory agency works well? Because it is a very singular moment in capitalism when you take unelected bureaucrats and you give them the power to write laws and to enforce them. They have no accountability at some level because parliament ultimately has electoral accountability, whereas the unelected bureaucrats in a financial regulator have no accountability. So it's a puzzle, it's a public administration challenge of how to define the objectives of each external agency, how to define the powers, and how to define the accountability mechanisms. And unless we confront those three questions properly, we will always make a mess of it. The middle income trap is a pervasive corruption where the politicians and the systems of government, including the judiciary and big business, are able to work together and close the game, so to speak, where it becomes a closed racket and the private players are able to get away with unlimited amounts of misbehavior and essentially face no risk of enforcement, where private players are able to throw up entry barriers. So here's a small intuition in how we should think about it. If you were going to start a company in India, if you were going to start a business in India, today it is a very big question mark about the extent to which you run the risk of litigation. Okay, your business rivals might embark on litigation against you, and this might end up taking 10-20 years in court, and some of the rulings might not be entirely reasonable. Now that's a risk, that's a danger. If you are the incumbent established 1,000 families of India, you know how to play this. You've got the relationships, you've got the human networks through which you are able to participate in this game. But for an entrant, it's forbidding. It's a far more frightening prospect to embark into this. That's an example of the way in which we end up closing entry. We end up closing the market economy. And then we end up with the 1,000 families and the legislature working in unison. These problems are obviously exacerbated in areas with more government involvement. So if you are going to do fields like infrastructure or natural resources or finance, then the interplay between the private sector and the government is much more close. And then the risk we run is that the most rotten firms rise to the top.